for Washington County. And I believe you all just got a notice that this meeting is being recorded. So if you do need to pop out and return, that's totally fine. We'll post this on the website later this week. And I will be providing facilitation for tonight. But before I go any further, I just want to take a minute to have our interpreters kind of explain how to get set up with interpretation for this evening so that everyone can participate.
Yes, it will be my pleasure to do that. Sí, muy buenas noches. Tenemos interpretación disponible para esta junta. Si está ingresando por medio de un dispositivo móvil o un teléfono inteligente, van a ver 3 puntos con la palabra más o more en la parte inferior de su pantalla. De ahí va a haber un nuevo menú donde se necesita desplazar y activar la función de interpretación. En estos momentos no lo puede ver debido a que todavía no está activado, pero dentro de un momentito lo va a poder hacer. También si está ingresando por medio de una computadora, en vez de esos 3 puntos va a haber un icono de globo que dice interpretación y de ahí va a poder seleccionar su idioma de preferencia. Si prefiere escuchar la junta en inglés, por favor,
Thank you, Victor. I'll give it another minute just to make sure that everyone transitions and also flag that we have some information up on the screen that kind of explains also how to get connected with interpretation. And one flag also for English speakers is you want to make sure that you are still in the English channel. It can cause some complexities if you don't select one or the other, where then even when an interpreter has jumped from like the Spanish to the English channel and vice versa, you might miss pieces of the conversation. Thank you. All right, I think that's enough time for us to get started. And if you're having any issues in the chat, also feel free to message us and we can troubleshoot for folks as well. We really want to encourage participation and make sure that this meeting is as accessible as possible. So I just want to share a special thank you to everyone who is attending tonight. I know that folks have busy schedules and this is giving up a weeknight evening. I'm really looking forward to when we get to the Q&A part and we can hear feedback from folks and answer really specific questions. There are a couple ways that you can provide feedback for the meeting tonight. The first is there's a Q&A feature at the bottom of the Zoom and you can enter a question there at any time. It doesn't just have to be at the Q&A part of the presentation. That will be a resource for us that we return to where we will answer questions specifically from that component of the meeting. And then there will also be an opportunity for folks to verbally ask questions as well. And the way you would do that is by using the raise your hand feature when we get to the Q&A part. And I will call on you. You'll be able to unmute, ask your question or share feedback. And I'll kind of toggle back and forth between answering written questions and verbal questions. And I also just want to recognize the barriers to engagement. We know when we're doing community engagement around shelters and more broadly that there are many barriers that exclude communities of color and other marginalized people from participating in our decision-making processes. I want to really acknowledge the unique and invaluable lived experience of immigrants, people of color, and other historically excluded community members. There will be other opportunities besides tonight to share your perspective. We have another meeting scheduled for July 11th. And in advance of that, if you require any specific modifications or accommodations to participate in that meeting, be that interpretation in another language besides Spanish or childcare needs at our next event, please don't hesitate to reach out to us and we'll really do our best to accommodate that request. There will be contact information at the end of this presentation, and I'll also have one of my fellow panelists add that in the chat as well for people to utilize as they see fit. All right, so next slide, just touching briefly on our meeting agenda. We're here today to talk about the Safe Rest Pods in Cornelius, talk about our partnerships that will go into putting together a successful program, an overview of kind of everything that goes into that, discuss how we got here, look at next steps, and then I really want to use as much of the time as possible for questions and discussion because we want to hear from all of you. a few ground rules that will be more relevant when we get to that point in the meeting. For folks that I unmute to ask a question, and also, folks listening right now, we just encourage respectful listening, no interrupting, no personal attacks, encouraging everyone to participate, to be patient and open-minded and positive. And I do want to just briefly explain, when we say be positive, that doesn't mean that we're not open to critical feedback and we want to engage in a dialogue. That's more reflective of wanting to encourage everyone to participate and avoiding those personal attacks that I think can be really challenging in a meeting space. Again, we'll have other opportunities for participation, but these are just some rules that I think are important to return to in conversation and community dialogue. All right, and without further ado, I would just like to introduce Marnie Kyle, who is our Assistant County Administrator, and will be continuing with the presentation. And yeah, Marnie, I just welcome you to introduce yourself.
Great, thank you, Emily. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy evening. We really appreciate you coming to learn more about these programs. As Emily stated, my name is Marnie Kyle. I'm one of the Assistant County Administrators, and housing as well as Health and Human Services are in my portfolio. I want to start by saying I really understand, we all understand that as you learned about this new shelter program coming to your community, that many of you were concerned. And so today is really an opportunity for us to share more detail about the program and the partnerships that we have and are forming to address some of those fears and concerns and to create with you a good neighborhood plan. The voters approved the supportive housing services measure that was passed 2 years ago, and that has a goal to end chronic homelessness in the region, which I would guess that all of us on this call are interested in seeing happen. So we're working in Washington County by adding hundreds of new shelter beds, and those are shelters of all different types across the county so that people who are living outdoors on the streets have options and places to come inside and get the help that they need. The shelter map that I think you'll see in front of you momentarily. Next. Perfect, thank you. The shelter map that you see here shows the shelter system that we're building. It shows the current shelters as well as future shelters that we are working with partners across the county to address and open within the next year. While new permanent shelters are being built, our board has directed staff to create temporary pod villages to increase safe shelter options for people in the meantime. I do want to be clear that community engagement does not occur around that question of where should we site the shelters. For that, we follow a co-created community guidelines for shelter siting that were developed with our community partners and during several community engagement sessions in the winter and spring of 2021. So those guidelines include this first step of community engagement after the shelter has been sited to help you learn more about the program and future sessions so that we can talk more about what your needs are. We know homeless is a growing concern in Washington County, and this future shelter program will help address this crisis, along with other new shelters, new housing programs, outreach workers, and all sorts of programs that are launching in Washington County that are in response to this crisis. Next, I'm going to pass the baton to Jessie Adams. Jessie is our capacity program supervisor, and she's going to share more about the shelter programs, the future shelter program at this site, and the community engagement process that will happen before the shelter opens. Thanks, Jessie. On to you.
Hey everyone, thanks Marnie for the introduction. So yes, I'm Jessie Adams. I use she, her pronouns, and I am the capacity program supervisor. So I'm going to talk, as Marnie mentioned, about the shelter program programming overall throughout the county, the shelter program at this site specifically. And then we also have Jeremy Taves and John from Open Door to present on the specific shelter program that they are going to be running at this site, since they are the owner and operator of the Cornelius Safe Rest Pods. Can you go to the first slide? So this slide talks about our overall homelessness response. As Marnie mentioned, the SHS measures goal is to end chronic homelessness in the county, and that's what we're working towards. We're adding shelter beds throughout the county. These are shelters of different types in different cities throughout the county so that people can access shelter that works for them in the community where they live, work, and have supports in place. We don't want to ask people who have supports in place in, Cornelius to shelter in Tigard. We want people to be able to access shelter in the community where they are. Along with housing case managers at each shelter that help participants move towards permanent housing, shelters also include culturally specific services and other wraparound supports like behavioral health, addressing substance abuse issues, and wraparound supports like that continue once people find permanent places to live. We also have outreach teams in place. They're assigned to areas throughout the county, so they get to know the people who are outside in their area and build trust to help people access shelter, find that safe space to work towards, again, that always end goal of permanent housing. Next slide, please. So these bubbles show the components of the system I was just talking about, how they work together. The shelter and outreach programs to get people inside and safe, the case management and wraparound services that work to move people from out of shelter and outside into housing. And then once they're in housing, the last piece of this puzzle is the housing and long-term rent assistance programs that we have in place, so that once people are in housing, they have the financial supports as well as those wraparound supports through case management to maintain those tenancies and housing long-term. Next slide, please. So these charts show that system in action. The number of people living outside has gone down to 230 as we've increased the number of shelter beds that we have available throughout the county from 49 to 426. And that is a difference in 2 years. That's a difference that this SHS measure has made in our county. We have gone from only 49 to 426 in 2 years, an incredible lift through our community stakeholders and county workers and jurisdictions to get to that place. So a lot of people have been able to access those shelter beds and then again, move from shelter into permanent housing. So you can see on that housing system capacity slide that we've helped almost 2,500 people access permanent housing through this SHS measure in 2 years. And again, that's always the end goal. So finding people unsheltered, moving into shelter, and then moving into housing. All right, next slide, please. So today we're here to talk specifically about the temporary pods that are going to be on 4th Avenue in Cornelius. As Marnie mentioned, county staff has been directed by our board to move forward with siting temporary shelters. The laws and policies that I'm going to go over on this slide are what staff uses to site those shelters. And again, I just want to echo what Marnie says, that staff conducts these processes first before beginning the community engagement process. Community engagement is planned and begins once a shelter site has been identified and is moving forward. We know that learning a shelter program is coming to your community comes with a lot of questions and concerns, and that's what our community engagement process is focused on, hearing and addressing those concerns and creating a neighborhood plan that details how the shelter operator, participants, and the county can be supportive neighbors in your community. So I know there are links on this slide that you can't click on right now, but I want to let you know that this PowerPoint will be posted on our Pod Village info page, and then you'll be able to follow the links to any more information you would like on these things, but I'm going to go over them briefly. So in, sorry, can you go back to the other slide? Thanks. In 2022, as Marnie mentioned, county staff conducted a countywide community engagement process on shelter siting, and that created our community guidelines for shelter. We worked with community members, partner agencies, including culturally specific partners and those with lived experience to create those guidelines on what is important to consider when siting shelters throughout the community. So things like transportation, access to resources, what is close by those shelters, and a focus on geographic equity, again, ensuring that there is shelter access throughout our county. Then there is state legislation in place called House Bill 2006 that allows the super siting of shelters. passing through land use requirements to respond to the homelessness emergency that we see here in our community. Beyond that, the governor's emergency orders further directed Washington County to create 60 more shelter beds this year to increase capacity and respond to that emergency. So these things all together, the co-created guidelines, the land use allowance, the direction from our board, and the governor's orders allow staff to search for shelter sites that also meet shelter building program needs, like flat land and utility hookups. And staff works with stakeholders and realtors to search for sites. That work has led us to the map that you saw earlier with Marnie. Can you go to the next one?
Hey, I just want to chime in briefly before we go to the next slide. We saw a request for the interpreters to slow down a little bit. I'm assuming that is also contingent with us slowing down.
Okay, thank you.
So at the end of each slide, we'll just give like 30 seconds to really make sure the interpreters have time to catch up. And then we don't miss any content, and we're just going to go. So I'm just going to hold on this slide for like another 30 seconds because there was a lot of content here, and make sure it all had time for interpretation.
Okay, thank you, Emily. All right, so this map you all saw earlier with Marnie, and it shows current and future shelters, as well as temporary ones that are going to be in place while the permanent ones are constructed. So we're working to have the diverse shelter models to meet the diverse needs of those experiencing homelessness. So we are looking to cite congregate models, where large groups are sheltered in one area, like the kind of bunk bed models people are kind of typically used to seeing. Hotel and pod villages, like the one we're here to talk about today. And we're looking to cite all those different types of shelters throughout the county, again, so people can access the type of shelter they need in the community in which they live. You can see here that prior to the pod village sites being identified in Aloha and then again here in Cornelius, there were no shelter beds at all in Cornelius and only 20 in Forest Grove. Data shows that there is a high rate of homelessness in these areas and that the Hispanic community is accessing our currently open shelters. We're building a system with intention to be responsive to the needs and gaps we see throughout the county. That was the life-changing impact of the SHS measure. We are able to address these long-standing gaps in our community and serve those experiencing homelessness. So this means we've been underserving parts of the county, and there are parts of the county that currently do not have access to shelter beds. So these 30 beds are serving that unmet need. Pause here again, Emily. So this slide has the site details for the Cornelius Safe Rest Pods. This site is going to temporarily provide 30 shelter pods for up to 40 people. So there will be 30 Conestoga huts on site, and 10 of those have the ability to hold couples. So that means that we could have up to 40 people on site if there are couples accessing those 10 pods. It also has the timeline that we went through in order to get to this point. And it shows that once the site was confirmed, when Open Door purchased and finalized the sale of the property, on that day is when neighbors were notified and the community engagement process began. Construction has started on the property, and once construction and community engagement are both complete, we are scheduled to open the site in August of 2023. But once construction and community engagement are both complete. And then there's a photo there on the slide of the site plan for what the site will look like, where the pods will be in relation to the street and buildings that are already there. When you're ready. Oh, thank you. So I'm going to do a really quick overview of our shelter programs, and then I'm going to pass it off to John and Jeremy from Open Door to talk through some specifics about their programming. But all of our shelter programs include basic things. They include a safe place to sleep. They include a place to keep belongings and pets. If people have pets, we want to make sure that people know that they can bring their things and their family members. Like, people consider pets their family a lot, and it's a large barrier to accessing shelter. So we want to make sure that people can have their pets and things be safe with them. They always provide access to bathrooms, showers, laundry, and kitchen. There will also be garbage on site. There's always staff 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There will be staff on site to enforce a code of conduct that promotes safety for the participants and the surrounding community. And participants are always referred through a coordinated access system. This means that people cannot simply walk up to the shelter and request access. They do have to be screened and assessed through our coordinated access system. So have to be referred by a partner agency.
I am once again jumping in, we're doing good, but another reminder to slow down. I'm seeing in the Q&A that the pause is helping, but part of what is super helpful is we also just need to speak slower. I also want to offer to anyone who's listening right now, if there was content missed in the earlier part of the presentation, during the Q&A, we can absolutely go back to specific slides. We can reiterate information. That's what that time is there for. And so if there was anything missed to date, we're happy to go back as well.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So this slide is about the shelter staff that is, again, they're 24 hours a day, what they are trained specifically to provide. They work with participants on housing navigation, again, with that eye always on the end goal of housing. They are trained in de-escalation and harm reduction, as well as trauma-informed care and behavioral first aid. So they really are looking for those trauma responses or behavioral health needs that they can respond to. And if they're unable to meet the needs of the participant, they can then lean on their coordination and partnerships with law enforcement, as well as the county's mental health crisis response team to address any needs that the shelter participants have. They're also trained in culturally responsive care to meet the specific needs of everybody who accesses the shelter, so everybody feels safe and cared for while they're accessing shelter services. Next, to talk more specifically about their shelter programming is the owner and operator of the Cornelius Safe Rest Pods, Open Door. So Jeremy and John both work at Open Door, and I am going to turn it over to them.
Thank you, Jesse, for the intro. I appreciate that. Hi, everyone, and good evening. Thank you for taking, well, first, I just want to say thank you for taking time out of your busy evenings and likely away from your family to be here today to learn about the upcoming services that we're going to be bringing to Cornelius and the community. My name is Jeremy Taves. I'm the executive director for Open Door Housing Works. As you know, Open Door is a nonprofit organization that has been providing housing stability services ranging from not just the programs we're talking about here today, but Open Door really started as an organization that provided access to stable, affordable housing through homebuyer education workshops, talking to folks about home buying process and how they can become homeowners. We offer homebuyer education lending programs, IDA savings programs. We do home repair programs, We even do a lot of mortgage foreclosure for all of Washington County with mediations with servicers when people are, becoming delinquent on their mortgage because of
Hey, Jeremy,
unemployment. Oh, sorry.
just a little bit slower.
Sorry, I'm used to talking so fast. I'll slow it down. So we also offer mortgage foreclosure services, which those range from when people are experiencing instability due to job loss or underemployment. During the peak of the foreclosure crisis, we saw a lot of people facing foreclosure, and so we helped with mortgage payment assistance, talking to homeowners bank so we could negotiate new terms to keep their home affordable for them so they didn't end up in a homeless crisis situation. And we also provide a number of supportive housing services programs that support people experiencing homelessness within the communities of Washington County. And we've been doing that for several years now. We offer everything from having outreach teams that go out and canvass the area, offering access to services such as a day center for taking showers, getting a warm meal, access to clothing, sleeping bags, tents, things that people generally take for granted, but others need it for just preservation of life and basic needs. We also help our community through housing navigation services and supportive services through tailored one-on-one case management. We work with a number of folks that are in our case management program that were either currently or formerly homeless that are in housing programs and working towards their own plan for affordable housing and self-sufficiency. We also offer a workforce development program, which is fairly new. We go out in the community and we do community cleanup programs, and we take people with lived experience and give them an opportunity for employment and to gain employment skills and then references as they move on to other employment opportunities. In fact, many of the folks that have gone through our shelter programs are also now gone full circle in our employees of Open Door and doing really well. We also currently operate 2 temporary shelters. One of them is in the transition of moving, which is the one we're talking about tonight. One of them started off as a winter shelter program at the Washington County Fairgrounds in the Cloverleaf building. For those that don't know, winter sheltering is essentially a critical service that preserves life and basic needs services through our coldest winter months here in Oregon. It's a critical program that we love to have stood up and be a part of for now going on 2 years. We had the capacity to serve 50 residents and a few overflow, what we call emergency bed for folks that might be identified from night to night that just need a warm place to stay for the night. Our general population, the folks that we serve, is about 65% men and 35% women. And they're all supported by a very caring and diverse staff. And as you heard from Jesse, is that these shelters operate 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and there's always staff on site to support the needs of the residents and the community. The other program that we offered that we're offering, it's new to us, and it's the program we're talking about tonight was the Hillsborough Safe Rest Pods on 17th that just recently closed, and we're working to have these 30 additional pods moved here to Cornelius. We took great pride in offering these 30 additional beds for up to 40 residents that Jesse had mentioned, because it's offering a safe and stable place for folks to rest their heads for the night. That's really important for us, is to make sure that folks are feeling safe in the community. Our shelters really are about providing safe, comfortable, and clean places for everyone in need. Both, like I said, both shelters are operating 24/7. We have our code of conduct in place that helps with that. Residents that are part of the shelters that we operate have access to warm meals, daily showers, clothing support, laundry services. They can have their pets on site, access to transportation. And then something that's really, I think, important for our shelter programs is that we offer access to work and volunteer opportunities. And then that just goes to adding the value when they're working in case management and towards their having that navigation to get into affordable housing, because housing is the end goal. Housing is the platform on which they can really build their stability. Our programs strive to provide a safe and comfortable and clean place for our residents, but equally as important is we are also striving to keep the community as a whole safe, comfortable, and clean for everyone. And that's what we're hoped to hear from all of you today, is how we can operate the shelter here in Cornelius as harmoniously and successfully as possible. We have been Open Doors has been in Cornelius for 38 years, going on 38 years here in October. It is our home, and we want Cornelius to continue to grow and thrive. Cornelius has been my home for over 25 years. I'm here, and I love this place, and I love the area. And as you can see through our services that we offer, and I'm only really touching on a few of them, a large part of our mission is to help people obtain and retain affordable housing and promotes client self-determination and achieve a better quality of life. And really, that's for everyone. We're here to support the community as a whole. And then I'm going to introduce John McPherson, who is our program manager of our shelter programs.
Hi, everyone. My name is John McPherson, and I am going to be overseeing all of the shelter operations for Open Door at all of our various shelter locations. Again, to reiterate what Jeremy and others have said, I really appreciate that you all have taken the time out to come here and speak with us and give us your insight and your criticism, so that we can help address any of the issues that you feel there are, and in positive and constructive ways. I've been doing this work now for about a good year, and it's been really rewarding.
John,
Yes.
it is a rite of passage to get the slow down reminder.
Slowing it down. And it's been a real privilege and an honor to be able to help work with this community and with the residents at our various shelter locations. For that, going forward, what I would really like to do is to make sure that that all of our shelter locations are working in unison with our communities, so that we can move forward in positive ways and constructive ways that will allow our residents to flourish as well as the community itself. And so that's what my hope and my goal is today, is to hear from you all on how we might be able to do that. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Appreciate that. And I think we're handing it back over to Jesse.
All right. Can we do the next slide really quick? I was hoping you all could talk really briefly about the code of conduct that you have at your shelters. I know you touched on it a little bit, but the slide is about that. Is there anything you would like to highlight here before I take the mic back?
Yeah, so all of our residents are expected to follow this code of conduct. There are very specific guidelines for them to follow, and if they are not adhering to that, then we have various outcomes for breaking with those rules. We obviously, first and foremost, want to make sure that our shelter guests are respecting not just each other and staff, but the neighborhood and the businesses that are surrounding us as well. That means that we expect our shelter guests to not loiter or panhandle. We expect our shelter guests to be part of the solution and not part of the problems. Obviously, that includes any illegal behaviors, which will result from anything from a written warning to a suspension from the program itself. There's no illegal parking of any vehicles of any type. This includes bicycles, and that's within the immediate neighborhood and community. So then no littering. And obviously our staff on the inside and then on the outside will be helping to maintain the look and the area, basically, to make sure that we're leaving the place looking really amazing and not adding trash as an issue. So yeah, and any more on this that we can discuss further in the meeting or further in the Q&A portion.
Awesome. Thank you both so much for being here. And thank you again to everybody else here who listened to our This is the first session of our community engagement series for the Cornelius Safe Rest Pods. So if you see on this timeline here, we are at the information and listening sessions part. So we just finished the information part, and now we are going to go into the listening and gathering feedback and concerns part. So any questions you all have, we have the Q&A feature. We also invite people to raise their hands, and Emily and Vara, our wonderful facilitators, will cycle back and forth between taking raised hands and taking questions from the Q&A feature. So we are going to take questions and feedback and concerns for the remainder of our time here tonight. And then,
I just want to flag the content on this slide, since it's not pre-translated. If you would just kind of verbally go over each item, and we make sure that people kind of hear the steps in the process also in Spanish.
Yes. So we are here at the information and listening session. So as I mentioned, we are going to take questions and feedback and concerns from you all for the rest of our time here tonight. And then we are going to use those questions and comments and feedback to create the content for the workshop. That's the next step. So that is a workshop with the site partners that are here today, the county, Open Door, and we'll invite other stakeholders as well, law enforcement, other county staff, shelter operators, to join us in that conversation as we really work towards forming a neighborhood plan. Again, the neighborhood plan is what the county operator will and participants will follow to be supportive neighbors in the community. Once the workshop is complete, staff will take that information and create a draft neighborhood plan. And then the next meeting will be focused on feedback around that draft neighborhood plan, really going over it and making sure that there are no concerns or things that aren't being addressed through that plan. Once that plan is completed, we'll notify neighbors of the shelter opening date, and we will send out that final neighborhood plan with that notification. Everything always will be posted online as well on our Pod Village part of our website. So you'll be able to always know what dates are upcoming, what part of the community engagement series is next. And as I mentioned before, this PowerPoint and any other information from previous engagements will be posted on that site as well. And then once the shelter is open, a session will be held 3 to 6 months after the shelter opens. For feedback about how everything is going. Does the neighborhood plan need to be adjusted? What can we work on to make things better? So that concludes the information part. And I think I covered a little bit of how the Q&A is going to work, but I am going to toss that back to Emily to make sure that I was correct and that we have the processes all set and in place for this next part.
Thanks, Jesse. So what you see here on the screen is a screenshot from our website. And again, there's a link here that you can't immediately access, but there's a short link included at the end of the presentation. We would really encourage everyone to take a look at that content as well. But today we're here to hear from all of you. This is an opportunity to ask questions, share feedback. I'm already seeing some questions in the Q&A feature, and my plan is that I will toggle back and forth between focusing on one of the questions in the Q&A feature and then moving to people who have their hand raised call on them, if you will, and have them ask their questions, share their feedback. We will get through as many questions as possible tonight, but I also know, there's lots of questions. If we don't get through everything, we have that next meeting on July 11th. We can address more questions then in addition to the workshop. And we are also happy to answer questions via email as well. So without further ado, I'm just going to start with the first question in the chat. I'm going to read these exactly as written unless there's something in the question that violates the ground rules that I shared at the beginning of the meeting. So the question is, I was told the shelter pods are low barrier. Can you let us know what low barrier shelters mean? And I think it makes the most sense to start with Jesse, but I think it would also be helpful to hear from Jeremy, who will be operating the shelter. So Jesse, let's start with you, but I'm assuming Jeremy will also fill in some information for us.
Yeah, thank you. So low barrier shelter is shelter that means that we don't screen people out. So that does mean that there are no criminal background checks conducted prior to entry. That part of the system is done through community corrections. And so we don't do that before people enter shelter. There is also no prior screening for drugs and alcohol use, but there is no drugs and alcohol permitted on site. But again, we are not screening people out for mental health concerns or criminal backgrounds. We are screening people into access shelters so we can provide the wraparound supports to get them, again, to that end goal of housing, to provide that stability. And we work with law enforcement and other community stakeholders and partnerships to ensure that people are accessing the correct supports. Like if they have are on parole or probation and have a parole or probation officer, that they are looped in on the address of where the person is staying and things like that. So low barrier is a shelter model that allows people to access shelter and get access the services they need to become stable and access housing.
Thank you, Jesse. I'm not sure what else to add to that because that's actually the correct definition for low barrier, but I do want to just note that low barrier also doesn't necessarily mean we allow illicit or legal activities to continue. So I think that's been a concern for some folks, is that we don't screen people out, but we do have a behavioral and code of conduct that we uphold, and we expect everyone that's within the shelter programs to abide by that, because it's part of our keeping our community safe, clean, and supportive for everyone. And if we identify folks that aren't meeting those, they generally will have either a talk to, a written warning, but we work with them to try to help with that. But if it's something that's pretty severe, then that could get them removed from the program. But I do also want to say that by and large, a lot of the folks that are accessing these programs truly want to succeed. And they just need to be reminded of what that means to succeed and how to, be a part of a successful sheltering program and to work towards their goals. And we've seen that time and time again, that people are very much wanting to be a part of this, even if they do, maybe if there's a curfew that they just came in a little bit late, but they had just forgotten. And so it's just a little reminder for them to maintain that code of conduct. So, but thank you. Appreciate that question.
Thanks, you both. Let's see. I see 3 hands raised. Nancy, I'm going to start with you. And I will ask you to unmute. Let's see. Try asking, please someone jump in if you can hear Nancy, if it's a me problem.
I can't hear her.
So they're coming. Give you a second.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Yeah,
Just do it. Let's do it from here. All right. Hey there. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. So pretty much,
Oh no. I could hear you. And then you muted again.
yeah, I'm unmuting. All right.
Okay.
Yeah, so one of my big questions, so in a town hall that was recently stated, there was some information that the county said that they had the long-term intention of having a permanent access center for homeless populations. However, even with the marketing for this meeting and the marketing of events before, it's always been a temporary shelter that will last for a few years just to cover the construction of the Hillsborough pods. So my biggest question is why, number one, is it not being communicated that there's a long-term intention to have the access center? And also in the future developments and plans that are being made, would y'all reconsider the consideration of a long-term access shelter?
Thank you for that question. Jess, I'm going to start with you. And then again, we may have Jeremy add on a bit as well.
Thank you so much for your question. I'm sorry I missed your name, but I appreciate that question, and it's an opportunity for us to provide some clarity on this issue that I've heard in a couple of spaces. So you are correct. The county is hosting right now these community conversations focused on the coming Shelter Pod Village program that we have planned and prepared to open later this summer. And we've prioritized that conversation with the community because the urgency of that project to provide shelter capacity needed in our community, consistent with the governor's directives and our board's directives. In addition to the temporary pod village that we are preparing, we did fund Open Door as part of a pretty extensive shelter capital funding opportunity earlier this spring. Sorry, I was just pausing for recollection of the date. I believe it was in March and April that we ran the process. And we had 7 organizations or government entities receive funding to create shelter temporarily or permanently. And in this case, Open Doors' permanent plan is to locate a access center at this site. But the timeline for that and the specifics of that project are far into the future. And so the conversation with the community right now has really focused on this first step of the project because not much more is yet known beyond that. I think, yes, it's a good idea to add Jeremy in if you want to add anything more from Open Doors perspective.
Thank you, Jess. Appreciate that. To add to that, I would say that, when we were doing our shelter siting, we did look at a number of spaces here in Cornelius, and the intention was to look for something to operate the Safe Breast Village for 18 to 24 months, because it's a temporary program as Washington County builds out the system of shelter programs here in Washington County. There is a long-term goal to build or potentially erect an access center, but more than just an access center, but a home office for Open Door. As I mentioned kind of in my introduction, is that Open Door is really a holistic housing organization, everything from offering services to help people buy homes, retain their homes. And I'm not just referring to the houseless population. That's a big part of what we do, but equally as big as we do is we're supporting homeowners, we're supporting thriving communities to build a financial future. And this would be a good location for us to plant those roots if we can make it work.
Okay, so I am going to look at the next question Q&A, which is specifically about the Safe Rest Pods in Hillsborough. It says the Safe Rest Pods location on 17th looked trashy and did not look well kept. Is there a plan to improve the maintenance at the Cornelius location? And I realize I didn't pick someone to speak. Jeremy, I think let's start with you.
Yeah, I think you can start with me, and then I might be able to loop in John to provide some insight. I know this has been a comment that I've heard in other spaces as well, and I think it's just an interesting dilemma that we're in, is that the Dairy Creek area has had a large encampment for a number of years. Prior to the Safe Rest Village opening, there was a large encampment over what was considered the old car wash, but now kind of part of a dealership. There was also a large encampment across the street adjacent to the cemetery that's there. And then there's just large little hubs of encampments that are just along that creek in Dairy Creek. I know that we take the cleanliness of the community very important. As part of our workforce development programs, we have a cleanup team that goes out into the community and does a lot of cleanup projects. They go to all of our shelter locations and clean up within half a mile. We also go to different TriMet stops and do cleanups. We go to different areas within Hillsborough and Forest Grove, Cornelius to do cleanups, areas of Washington County to do cleanups. But it's very important for us to always stop in at our shelter locations to keep the area clean. And I think that some of the things that we've encountered is that our residents really respect our code of conduct, which incorporates a cleanly community. But we also have an encampment that surrounds that entire area. And so that could be a result of the cleanliness could be a result of, or lack of cleanliness that might be seen could be a result of that. I do know that when we have our team out there to do a cleanup, it can be no more than 30 minutes to an hour, and there's some additional trash, flying around that we try to get staff out there to help clean up, or actually the residents will go out there and do some cleanup as well. So I don't know if John would like to add to that.
Yeah, so some of the things, and I think this is a great question because it is really important for us all as a community to be able to walk past these spaces and feel comfortable in them and not feel like it's an eyesore. What I will say is that some of the things that we've been doing to combat this, we have the encampment cleanup program that has been mentioned by Jeremy, but we took that a little bit further, and we've actually allowed some of our participants that are in the pods themselves to participate in that. And so when they go out there and they spend an hour or 2 hours cleaning up in and around the pods, we actually provide them a stipend to be able to receive something in return for doing that work. And we've had some really good success with multiple of our residents wanting to be able to participate in that program and earn a little bit of money. I'd also say that there are always challenges when it comes to this line of work. And one of the things that we're always trying to do is be innovative in how we're approaching this and making sure that going forward, that these sites are going to continue to be clean. I think that the biggest thing for us coming into this new location is that there's not going to be an encampment right behind us. And so we're not going to have to deal with a lot of the issues that that encampment had created.
I wanted to jump in and add a little bit to that as well, and talk about the fact that John and Jeremy both mentioned the encampment that was in Dairy Creek Park that was nearby the Hillsborough Safe Rest Pods, and quickly mentioned the difference between an encampment and a managed shelter. This will be a managed pod village where, as I mentioned, there will be hygiene facilities and garbage disposal areas, and it will be intentionally managed to keep things like garbage and all of that under control, as John and Jeremy already mentioned. I also wanted to bring up a policy that is going to be in place, and I believe in the next couple of months, called Time, Place, Manner. And that governs the time, the place, and the manner in which people are allowed to camp in cities and unincorporated Washington County. And so that will include a restriction around camping within a certain distance of homeless services. So this pod village will be considered homeless services, and there will be a restriction to camping around the pod village itself through that time, place, manner policy.
All right, thanks everyone. So I'm going to return to our verbal questions. And I understand that Centro has a group of folks right now that are on a couple Zoom accounts. And I think that is Nancy and Jonathan. So Jonathan, I'm assuming that is also you. And I'm going to unmute you. But if it's not, we can also return to Nancy. Yes. Okay, I can hear Jonathan's mic. Or I could.
So first of all, I have a letter from the.
I'm sorry to interrupt. Do you mind just speaking up a little bit more?
That's fine. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
So this is a letter from the residents and parents of. I have this, and I also have my own statement that I'd like to bring up, and then a few questions.
Your mic is still pretty spotty. I heard something about a letter from the residents.
Can you hear me from here?
Oh, much better.
Emily?
Yes.
Much better?
better.
Okay,
Yeah.
we got through. You're
We're
on.
good now.
Much better.
Okay, great. So just mute it for.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, so I have a letter from the residents and some community members from that area, and then I have a statement that I would like to read for you, just from me, and then a few questions for you.
That's great. The only thing I just want to be mindful of is that we have time for as many people as possible. So if it gets really lengthy, at some point we are going to have to shift to someone else. So let's definitely 2 or 3 minutes. That's fine. We'll reevaluate as we go along.
Okay. Our main concerns related to the shelter facility are the school bus stop. We fear for the safety of our children attending Cornelius Elementary, Tomic Hall, Forest Grove High School, as it is one of the main stops serving these schools. We also are concerned about the safety of the students who walk to Neil Armstrong. The close proximity of Neil Armstrong means that they do not receive transportation services and would have to walk past the shelter to and from school each day. While it's possible that the residents of the shelter wouldn't purposely bother the students, we worry that our children would have to face the fear of being exposed to potentially erratic individuals every day, a trait more common in the homeless population. The second bullet point, given that most of the families residing in the area are minorities, low income, and underserved communities, it's important to acknowledge that this is a vulnerable community. On page 9 of the community guidelines, expanding shelter programs with equity, created on March 31st, 2022, it states, shelter programs will not be concentrated in low income or neighborhoods where a high percentage of communities of color reside to prevent undue burden. According to latest US Census data, Cornelius is nearly 51% Hispanic. This community is majorly low income and Latino, and it is not equitable to place a shelter here for that reason. This is a point where Washington County can and should follow through in providing its residents the equity that we deserve. The city of Cornelius does not have the resources or infrastructure to address the needs of the general population. much less the health and safety needs of the group that will be housed in the temporary shelter. When I say that, they were referring to access to emergency services such as police. We have a smaller police force. And then in case of any mental health crisis, we do not have a center close by. We have witnessed how in other communities where camps are established, waste is a big problem and is often found on public roads, which generates a greater risk of contagious diseases and an increase of pests and rodents. This, combined with the drug abuse problem in the homeless community, can lead to the increased spread of bloodborne diseases through syringes left around the community. As most of the residents of Cornelius are low income, we are concerned about how this will affect public costs as well as the economy of minority-owned small businesses. It's worth noting that the mobile homes of Mariah Park already have relatively low market value compared to other homes. And if the homeless pods are placed here, the homes will be further devalued. This pushes a low-income community further into poverty and essentially traps those who will no longer be able to sell their homes for a price that would give them the funds to buy another home. Sincerely, residents and parents of Cornelius, Oregon. And then, for me personally, first of all, I want to point out that this meeting should have been in person. It feels very intentional on the county's part to plan the listening session for a community that clearly faces language barriers and lacks digital literacy to be online. The county should understand that the surrounding area of the site is a majorly low-income community, and it's probable that community members don't have access to a device with which to log into this meeting. In order to get people access to this meeting, I've had to ask Centro Cultural to give us a space where people can receive help to join this meeting. This is a very clear example of the shallow performative depth at which the county is willing to collaborate with the community. Secondly, I think it's been made incredibly clear to you all that this shelter placement is not equitable to the surrounding community. I will not give that speech again. The county's heard me at yesterday's meeting, and you understand that I am really only asking for follow through on the county's own guidelines. The guidelines for shelter placement were not followed. This is clear. I think that you all are aware of this issue, but I have seen no action to pause and rethink this decision. I worry that the kids who have no other option but to walk by the shelter will have to live every day dreading going to school. This is covered in the letter. I believe that Washington County can and must do better than this. At a minimum, the county should prevent this from being a long-term site for the sake of avoiding undue burden on certain demographics. And then I have two questions. So I had to find out from Representative McLean that this was brought on with the possibility of it being a long-term access point. So my question for that is, why is this not being explained in the flyers? And what would that look like? And then the next question, sorry.
Oh, you're good. I thought you were done. I think you've still got a little more time. You're fine.
Okay, my next question for you all is about how I spoke to Jeremy and John about site placement after the Cornelius City Council meeting a few weeks ago. Jeremy let us know that there were 5 sites in Cornelius that the county looked at for placement. He also told us that he would send to Ishan, someone who spoke earlier, the documents related to approving site placement. This was never received. Where is that email? And secondly, where were those proposed sites, and was this site chosen because the land is cheaper, or what was the reason for choosing it there?
Okay, so I realize I don't know your name. I assume it's not Nancy.
Emma.
Emma, you might have more questions, which is totally fine, but let's just pause there and address a few of those initial questions. And then as we have time, we can circle back to the others. So I want to start with the equity concerns because I feel like that encompassed a lot of your concerns. And then after that, we'll work on talking about the bus stop and the long-term use of the site. So starting with the equity concerns, I'm going to give Jess the floor.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Emma, for your thoughtful questions and your focus on the primary question, which is the one we would like to focus on first here as well. And then we'll work on answering some of the others that you also posed. The question of, is it equitable for Washington County to locate a shelter in Cornelius when so many people are identify as Latino, Latina, Latinx, Hispanic, and I experience living with low incomes? It's an excellent question. And it's correct that our shelter siting guidelines references a specific intention to make sure that when we create our shelter system, that we don't concentrate all of our shelters in low-income communities. However, it's our assessment in the county that we need to also provide equity in access to shelter, because a lot of people who identify as Latina, Latino, and Latinx and Hispanic also experience homelessness. And living with low incomes can sometimes correlate with having housing instability and needing access to emergency shelter. Currently, there is no shelter in Cornelius. There is one shelter operated by our wonderful partner, Centro Cultural, at Casa Amparo in Forest Grove, very close to Cornelius, though that shelter only has the capacity to serve 20 households at a time. And so while we see a higher rate of homelessness in this part of our county, we have very limited shelter options for the community in Cornelius and Forest Grove. In Hillsborough, for example, there are currently about 125 shelter beds available every given night, and a similar amount in Beaverton and in Tigard, other parts of the county. So when we worked to create equity in our siting of shelter throughout the county, we were intentional to identify opportunities to create shelter in both Cornelius and Aloha, because those are places right now that currently don't have any shelter, and their communities experience homelessness and need for emergency shelter operations or access to emergency shelter. There are many other questions that you raised, and maybe I can invite some of my colleagues in to help us answer some of those. I really appreciate some of the feedback we've heard about wanting to know more about the long-term plans for this site. I'll be very frank that we don't yet have very much information other than the desire to create an access center. We have access centers currently planned in Hillsborough and Tigard, and we are working to identify a location in Beaverton. So this would be the one access center serving Forest Grove and Cornelius as part of our long-term capacity to meet our community need in responding to unsheltered homelessness. So we are working to both build an intentional infrastructure of permanent shelters, which this is not. This is a temporary location, but also permanent access centers, which one day we hope this location will become. And we appreciate that feedback and can work on incorporating that information into our communication materials going forward.
The last component of Emma's comments that I thought would be worth addressing in the time that we have is concerns around the bus stop. And Jeremy and John, you and I have had conversations around how do we address bus stop concerns, and you would propose some suggestions. This is something that we might typically dive into greater depth in a workshop, but I would like to at least throw the idea out there so we can continue to finesse it as time goes by.
gonna let John chime in since I know he's part of developing kind of the procedures we're gonna have in place for that.
Yeah, so first and foremost, thank you, Emma, for your questions. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. And what I will say for the bus stop is that internally we had a lot of discussions on how best to approach this. One of the things that we're doing is that we've set up a station at the front of the gate where our staff is going to be. We're going to have at least one staff position there at all times. And whenever there are children present or we have pickups or drop-offs, our staff will actually step outside of the property and stand nearby to make sure that the children are going to be safe. We've also made sure to have conversations with all of our residents that during those times that they are not to be going out there and engaging with children at all in any circumstances, and that they can be potentially exited for breaking with that, because it is such a serious thing that we're going to take seriously, that you as a community should be taking seriously, and that our residents will be taking seriously. And as we go forward, we're still evaluating more options and thinking internally on how we might handle this even better. And we're also open to suggestions from the community as well.
Okay, and I want to go to our next question. One final thing I want to offer is that our next community meeting is in person. I hear that is a need for this community. Our goal is to offer these meetings in as many formats as possible, knowing that sometimes in-person meetings pose a challenge for other folks as well. So we're trying to do both. And we really welcome the opportunity to partner with other organizations if we even need to explore meeting with small groups of neighbors, one-on-one, phone calls, a variety of formats if we need to have additional conversations outside of those 2 official meeting spaces as well. Okay, I want to revisit the Q&A feature because some of these folks have been waiting quite a long time, and read aloud this question. What happens if someone is suspended from the program? Do you relocate them or do you let them go back to camping without a long-term goal? And open door, I know I keep calling on you, but I think it makes sense for you to answer this one.
Yeah, I can answer that, and then I'll let John pick up if I left anything out. So if someone is suspended from the program, we essentially create a path back to shelter for them. So even though someone might be exited, it doesn't mean that they can't ever come back to the program, but the severity of the exit will determine the length that they would come back. But many times we connect them with our outreach team so that they can be connected to other resources within the community or other sheltering programs within Washington County, because we don't want them to not have a place to go. But in some cases, depending on the severity of the exit, then they could be back, in a place of being unsheltered. But we do everything we can to mitigate that, and that's where our outreach team comes in to help solve a lot of those difficult challenges that we're facing.
The only thing that I'll add on to that is that as we move forward, we have behavioral plans, and we attempt to make sure that as we move into this behavioral plan, that when and if a participant is brought back, that they are automatically being held accountable for continuing down a proper path and not breaking with those same behaviors and breaking with the same behaviors that they had previously. And that as we go to exit someone, we take it extremely seriously that we make sure that they have a path to other shelters. One of the things that we like to do, depending on the severity and depending on the willingness of and cooperation from the resident, is actually to give them a couple of days to collect their things and then attempt to move them into another shelter if possible, and connecting them, as Jeremy mentioned, with our outreach team. where that's not possible, there is the possibility of an immediate exit, but we don't like to do that as much, and we always attempt to try and provide the resident with resources that they can and some helpful navigation towards other resources.
I also just kind of want to acknowledge that this is a tough question that we hear around how do we address challenging behaviors from shelter guests, and when it reaches the point of someone needing to be exited from the program, how do we address that? The reality is there is not always a good solution for every individual. However, our commitment and our partnership with Open Door is such that we really emphasize not just exiting those folks, back into the community to avoid that negative impact. And it also somewhat relates to a public camping ordinance that Washington County is working on, along with several neighboring jurisdictions. I believe that includes the city of Cornelius, that will restrict public camping, particularly near shelter locations, because we recognize that.
Hello, can you hear me? Hello?
Yes.
I think your 3 minutes is up. You're wasting our time. We have other people that have questions.
Oh, well, I was just briefly addressing the question, and
well, it's not.
Oh. Well, I'll just end that part of our public camping ordinance restricts camping near shelter locations for that reason. So I will move to the next question. I think Michael has been waiting the longest. So Michael Asp, I'm going to go ahead and ask you to unmute. Michael, it looks like you're not muted, but I'm not hearing you yet. Michael, I'm sorry, but if I can't hear you, go ahead and put your question in the chat, and you can even put your name next to it in the Q&A feature, just unless something changes and we are able to hear you, because I want us to get through some more questions. Okay, looking at the next question, and I'm actually going to combine a few questions because, again, I recognize we're down to 12 minutes and I want to address as many questions as possible. A theme that I'm seeing in the next 3 questions is around drug use and alcohol. What is permitted, what is not, how is that enforced? And Jeremy and John, between the two of you, if you could just address what is included in the code of conduct around drug and alcohol use, and how you enforce that to encourage folks to be successful, maybe resources that you can connect folks with as well.
Yeah, so first and foremost, there are no drugs or alcohol of any kind allowed on property. People are allowed to smoke cigarettes, but we have a specific designated smoking spot for them. For drug and alcohol, if we find that on property, that is an immediate exit from our program. Dependent on how much or what it was being used for, it can be a longer exit or a slightly shorter exit, but typically no shorter than around 3 months or so. We tend to try and navigate for people who have addiction issues who are willing to work with us towards getting that help. We have a lot of different resources that we can provide them, including taking them up to some of the recovery centers in Portland. We've taken people up there and sat with them and waited for them to get in. Those are not always, those are hit or miss, but they have them there. They have the Hawthorne walk-in clinic that we help navigate people towards. And in general, we tend to be there to help them come to grips with their own addiction issues and talk them through some of the problems that they're having and attempt to get them to want those services and those help and that kind of help. So some of the other issues are that if some of our residents are caught in the surrounding area with drug paraphernalia, they can also be exited if we're given the description or evidence of that. Did I hit all of that then, or was there something else I might have missed?
No, I think that was a full answer. Let's see. Okay, so we are back to our verbal questions. Nancy, I'm going to assume that because you've got a big group with you, that there's another question in the room. If that's not the case.
Yes, this is the case. Hello, good afternoon. My name's Ayla Hoffler. I'm from Banks. I'm a PCP of House District 31. I'm here to help my neighbors in Cornelius do a cease and desist of this site. You have not invited these people that live in this residential area to be a part of the initial site choosing. You have used the emergency clause in an abusive, manipulative way to try to force this into people's lives. You're devaluing their homes. You're going to put their kids at risk, and we don't need not one incident from these folks. You're not screening them for addiction, okay? You're going to let them out for the day and they come back intoxicated. You know, who knows what status they'll be when they walk in the site. If it's my understanding, these pods are 64 square feet, correct? So they're the size of a coffin. So what are you going to do next? Give them clean needles and fentanyl for free and let them just OD in their box?
Ma'am, I'm going to remind you of the ground rules.
The ground rules are that this is a reality. I'm sorry, ma'am. I've been a nurse for 40 years. I've taken care of addicts. I know exactly their lifestyle. I have no prejudice against them, but you are not helping these people. You are prolonging their addiction. You're putting the folks in Cornelius at risk to lose their businesses and homes value. You need to put them in a site where they're properly cared for mental health and addiction. And you are not going to do that with your 2 security people that walk around for 24 hours a day. Okay? And you're paying $2,500 a day to have those security people walk around and make sure that people are picking up their garbage. I think that $2,500 a day could be spent much better in this community. And just if Open Doors getting a nice new building, well, great, they've done a great service here. But just because you're getting all these federal dollars to do this temporary housing, which is not housing, who are we kidding here? You need to pick a place away from people's residential and school areas. So we say, no, not here. Nunca, aquí.
Thank you so much for your question and your comment. We appreciate the feedback and the concern, and we want to we want to affirm and confirm we hear that concern.
Yeah, we will see you. We will see you July 11th in person. No more Zooming. We are not people that play techie, chat. And, you know, we're not real interested in pronouns either. So just come and be part. Yeah, thank you very much.
But remember, we agreed we're not interrupting each other. You're welcome to share more of that at the next meeting.
You didn't follow the 3-minute rule. You've been talking for 15 minutes to use up our time.
That's just because I'm facilitating the meeting and, you know, we're answering questions. So I'm going to mute you. And we're going to address the concerns you raised. You're welcome to return again to our July 11th meeting.
We really hear you and others in the community who've raised concerns around safety, specifically around drug use and addiction in the community. We know right now our community is.
Jess, we still have questions from the audience and we'd like to continue to ask the questions. Thank you very much. The next gentleman will take his time. Thank you.
Nancy, I just want to clarify, would the preference be to not address the comment that was just made and move to the next question?
Yes, please.
Okay, thank you.
Sí, muy buenas tardes, señores y señoras que nos encontramos presentes en esta reunión. Hoy es el día 28 de junio de 1923. Estamos reunidos escuchando aquí el proyecto y programa que están dando a saber aquí los señores que están frente de nosotros. Y traen buen proyecto porque sí hablan de vivienda, hablan de ¿qué es? De albergue que dijo por ahí. Entonces sí, creo que todo eso es importante, ¿verdad? Y de parada de bus, que falta que nos interprete en español la muchacha aquí, porque sí leyó el papel que traía, pero falta que nos interprete en español cuál fue lo indicado de los papeles que ella leyó. Eso es lo importante que debemos saber también, ¿verdad? Porque todos estamos para saber esto y gracias a cada uno de ellos que traen estos proyectos, programas, que la verdad, en la ciudad de Cornelio, pues falta mucho que ser, falta mucho que ver y todo eso. Falta mucho servicio. Tenemos la biblioteca, tenemos ya la iglesia católica, ya nuevo y todo, y más cosas necesitamos aquí en nuestra ciudad de Cornelia. Yo tengo aquí de 1980, pero no hablé inglés porque siempre mi trabajo fue en el campo y viví nomás en el campo, entonces fue difícil para que yo aprendiera inglés. Y pues ahora ya menos de grande, ya esta edad que llevo, creo que es difícil para mí hablar inglés, ¿no? Pero lo bueno que hoy actualmente ya hay muchachos que hablan dos lenguajes, español e inglés, y creo que eso es bueno para que uno nos dé saber, si no sé hablar inglés, pero el muchacho ya está para hablarme, interpretar inglés, y creo que eso es importante para que uno sepa nuestro beneficio que hay aquí en Ciudad de Cornelias. Y gracias por asistir. Y pues esperamos más aquí de todos los señores que se encuentran aquí, que ellos están frente del gobierno, de la gobernadora de Ceylan. Tenemos actualmente la nueva gobernadora y los demás pues están ahí, que están cerca de ella, pues creo que está haciendo bien la gobernadora del estado de Oregon porque está mandando muchos proyectos y es que esperamos. Necesitamos más escuela, más educación, más seguridad, más todo y creo que eso es bueno. Es todo.
Okay, I want to pause here and see if the interpreter can move to the English channel and just do, a summary or as close to it around what was just shared from Nancy's room.
We do have another question.
And I also want to add, I'm just chatting with staff here and we're going to go 10 minutes over because I know there's a lot of questions. Again, we may not hit every question, but we're going to go 10 minutes over, see if we can hit a couple additional questions. I just want to leave space for the interpreter to come over and briefly share what we just heard.
Emily, I think there might be some confusion. So for folks who are participating, there should be an option to select a translation button and you can choose either English or Spanish.
Oh no, did everyone else hear that? When I shared my screen, I was nervous trying to fiddle with that, so I didn't. Okay, if people have already heard that, then yes, let's move along. Nancy, I'm going to offer your room one more question, and then I also want to return to the Q&A and hit a question there as well. Okay, so Nancy, continue.
Hi there, my name is Ishan and I'm speaking as a private citizen against the placement of these pods in this area. First of all, thank you for listening. Thank you for hearing our arguments as well as our emotions. We believe that we should address homelessness, but we really want to emphasize that it should be in an equitable way. Oh, by the way, this is just a short 2-minute comment and then a follow-up with a question. So one major observation I'd like to make is that mitigation, such as the code of conduct policy, the 24/7 staffing, I really want to emphasize that that's not unique. That can be done anywhere and any place. But at the same time, NIMBY, right, not in my backyard, is also a non-unique thing to say. So what is the unique thing that's going on here that should be considered? And I would say that the unique thing that previous people have brought up is the economic, ethnic, and other demographics of this particular location that are different compared to other locations, which needs to be considered, and that's what violates the SHS guideline. I would also argue that not being clear with the long-term intention, even though I understand that it is something that is still in the works, I think it does violate the communication standard that was stated in the SHS, because it's just kind of it seems almost like a Trojan horse from a policy standpoint, because it's once you kind of have the argument due to the executive order to get the temporary housing in there, it'll be much easier to justify building and expanding long-term access shelter in that area. However, if you're going to have something that's permanent, that would require a lot of analysis, a lot of research, a lot of investigation that would be much greater than the amount of time you have given the executive order. So it kind of feels from a policy standpoint like a Trojan horse, kind of like something that would lead to a further kind of cause a further pain. So the call to action essentially is, our question is, will you be willing to research other sites at this time? Will you be willing to reconsider the long-term intentions? And just to conclude, we want to support the homeless population. They need a home. People are dying. But at the end of the day, if you don't make the right steps, it'll contribute to poverty, which will increase more homelessness and more problems. So you can't cut off the head of a hydra only for more to sprout up. You have to take the right step every step of the way. So those are kind of like my two call to actions is, number one, would you be willing to research other sites? And number two, would you be willing to reconsider long-term intentions? Thank you so much.
Thank you. And I'm going to let Jess answer this question, but I just want to offer briefly that I'm the person who works on a lot of flyers and postcards related to this project. So I'm hearing the feedback around being more clear about the long-term use of this.
Questions. It was short questions. So I have a question. You guys had mentioned you guys do screening. So what is considered a screening to you guys? Because I know you guys said you guys don't drug test and you guys don't do background checks. So what is a screening that you guys mentioned? In addition, you guys said there's no drugs, and I know that's a rule in the pods, but how are you guys preventing from the people going outside of the pods and coming back in under the influence? What is it that you guys are doing? Are you guys not letting them back in if they're under the influence, or are you guys still letting them back in? And if that were to happen, if there was a situation going on, what would you guys do at that point? What are the bodyguards gonna do for the community if something gets out of hand? Because the police also aren't gonna just come up if it happens constantly.
Okay, thank you. We'll take that question, as well as I just want to make sure we address the original gentleman's question. So we need to not interrupt each other. I know there's a lot of interest, and we're trying to address as much as possible, but we can only address questions that we have time to answer.
At this time, I will answer the question, is the county willing to consider another location? At this time, we need to move forward with opening this shelter this summer to provide for urgent need of community members experiencing homelessness. We understand the concerns around the possibility that this will lead to more homelessness, more poverty. And in fact, what we find is when we create new shelters, it gives people who are homeless in that community a place to go. For example, we worked recently to close down the camp, the Highway 47, helping all of those individuals connect to available shelter capacity. Some of those folks moved into other temporary shelter beds and might be able to move into this location later this summer when they're no longer able to stay at the current temporary shelter capacity. So as a county, we are always trying to urgently respond to the unmet need for shelter, emergency shelter for people to go tonight. And we need to bring this capacity online. So we are going to move forward with this site this summer. And regarding the long-term conversation, I think that is an important conversation for us to continue having with the community to make the right permanent investments in Cornelius and Western Washington County with an access center. I think there was a question around drugs and alcohol. Was that the last question, Emily? And maybe I could, I've forgotten. Okay, so maybe I can pass the baton to our colleagues at Open Door. I know you've answered similar questions.
Yeah, I'd be happy to jump in and answer that. First, I'd like to address the fact that we wouldn't call our staff bodyguards. They're not going to be out there patrolling as if they are bodyguards. They are trained staff to handle a lot of different situations, and that includes helping to cook and maintain facilities, and to identify some of the residents that are going through crisis and help them navigate resources. They're not there to be bodyguards though. And secondly, when it comes to drugs on property, our staff are trained to be able to identify the residents that are currently going through withdrawals or other issues, and or under the influence of drugs and alcohol, and then help provide them with resources and help. When it comes to finding out if there are drugs on property, we do pod checks on a daily basis, and if we do find any paraphernalia, that can lead to an exit from our program. Beyond that, we try not to invade our residents' privacy just as much as we wouldn't want to invade anyone else's privacy. But we are mindful of any of the mindful of what is going on in the pods as much as we're able, and taking into consideration the fact that many of our residents, if they do go off property and use and come back, that as if they aren't maintaining, that we are working with them to find ways to help them get access to the services that they need.
Okay, I think we have time for 2 more questions. I just did a skim through of our Q&A since we don't have time to hit through on each of them individually. I saw a couple themes that I was just hoping we could briefly think about. One was around why this site location, why it makes sense, why it doesn't, were there other sites that were considered? And then we're going to pivot over to, I'm assuming Nancy's group will have another question, but if not, I'll pull out one more theme from the Q&A feature.
One second, we're having our person come over to speak their question.
Jonathan, your mic is quiet. I realize I might need to go back to Nancy. Maybe let's switch to Nancy's mic again.
No, I'm here.
Oh, yeah, okay.
Buenas tardes. Bueno, primeramente no sé si sean las palabras correctas, pero no es que estemos en contra de todo lo que están haciendo, tal vez se les aplaude en cierta forma. Lo que no estamos tal vez de acuerdo es por el lugar que va a estar. Lo hablo por los niños, porque yo veo cada día que bajan de la escuela niños caminando porque sus papás están trabajando, X cosa. Ok, ustedes dicen que va a haber seguridad. De por sí con la pandemia tienen ansiedad, depresión, van a mirar más esa situación ahí? ¿Ustedes creen como padres de familia que esos niños van a estar más seguros viendo todo lo que está pasando, que a veces se miran hasta en las tiendas tirando las jeringas, lo van a pisar, yo qué sé, salen a caminar con las mascotas los niños por lo mismo que sufren de ansiedad? Queremos que salgan a caminar. Ahora, ¿qué vamos a decirles? No pasen ahí. Y nosotros, como yo lo digo por personal por mí, porque es la única entrada, yo no tengo otra entrada para Mary Park, es la única, es privada. Entonces dicen que va a haber seguridad, pero ¿quién nos garantiza que los niños no van a sufrir más de estrés o ansiedad mirando lo que miran alrededor? Dice, me pasó apenas hace unos días, yéndome a 47. Sale una persona con un rifle. Entonces, ¿creen ustedes que yo me siento segura de dejar mi niña que baje en el bus? Si yo lo estoy mirando hace 2 días y tal vez que uno de ustedes estaba ahí porque estaban como 5 patrullas. Y pasa una persona con un rifle. ¿Ustedes creen que yo me siento ahora más segura? Y no por mis niños, por todos los que estamos ahí. ¿Han pensado también las personas que de mayor edad que están solas ahí? Y dicen, no podemos hacerles nada. Entonces, ¿cómo podemos protegernos nosotros? ¿O cómo nos protegen ustedes también a nosotros? No sé si sea pregunta, pero me siento como un poco triste por la situación. A la vez también apoyo lo que hacen, no estoy en contra de eso y yo creo que nadie de nosotros está, sino que buscar un lugar adecuado, más que esté un poco más aislado. ¿Por qué no hacerlo? ¿Por qué donde está la comunidad más cercana? Mucha gente va a caminar a la tienda porque tenemos la seguridad de que, ok, ve a la tienda, está a 2 minutos, camina. Pero ahora, ¿qué vamos a hacer? ¿Nos encerramos más? Como padres de familia, yo quisiera también que pensaran un poco en toda esa situación, en las personas también de tercera edad. También necesitan apoyo, también necesitan que los protejamos. ¿Y cómo los vamos a proteger si los estamos pues mandando donde, no sé, es un sitio, pienso que no es un sitio adecuado para instalarse ahí? Es mi opinión, no sé si los demás estén de acuerdo, pero lo siento por mis palabras, no soy muy buena expresándome, pero es lo que yo siento como madre de familia y como persona residente de aquí de Cornelius.
¿Qué más? ¿Qué más? Yo no tengo preguntas ahí. Ahí. Y tengo una pregunta. Mi pregunta es, las personas que duermen en la calle, mientras duermen, enseñarlos a que tengan esa área limpia, ponerles un bote para la basura, mientras tengan un lugar donde vivan. Y para la seguridad, como dijo de esas de las armas, pues no hay más como evitar las ventas de las armas y hay más seguridad para la comunidad, pero pues, es un negocio, ni modo. Hoy crear también un grupo para limpiar la ciudad, todas las ciudades, todo lo que es, no solo la ciudad, sino todo el estado de Oregon, para que haya menos peligro para las personas que andamos caminando. Un proyecto de topes es más seguro para la pasión, no sé, nada.
Yeah, one more. No.
Thank you so much for your feedback. We hear you on the
We still have
concerns.
another.
Okay, we can do one more. One more, but then we do have to call it. We're totally open to meeting other times. We have other meetings planned for the future. So
Okay,
we'll
so
do one more.
¿cuál es el punto de estar en esta reunión si no están tomando ustedes en cuenta nuestras opiniones? Han violado nuestros derechos como ciudadanos de aquí, porque nosotros nunca antes nos preguntaron si estábamos de acuerdo. Creo que Washington County tiene demasiados recursos como para buscar en otro lugar. Nada más pasando, si van a mover a la gente de la Winco que está ahí, cuando vamos a la Winco hasta corremos peligro. Yo tuve una experiencia con un homeless de ahí de la Winco, bajando yo mi marqueta. Un señor vino y me quería arrebatar mi bolsa de mandado. Esa es una. Y así pasamos y tienen un desorden ahí. Acaban de decir ustedes que la seguridad no es para estar las 24 horas, sino solamente para cosas especiales. Y cuando no sean eventos especiales que dañen a la sociedad o a la comunidad que está ahí, ¿quién nos va a ayudar en esos momentos? Hillsborough tiene más policías que Cornelius. Debieron de haberlos llevado para allá o hacer el proyecto donde hay más seguridad para el público. Entonces, yo creo que nuestras opiniones y lo que nosotros sentimos, porque nosotros aquí somos gente trabajadora, pagamos nuestros impuestos, no molestamos a nadie, estamos aquí buscando tranquilidad, ahorita estamos en una comunidad donde no hay un alto porcentaje de crímenes. Ahí donde estamos en Mariah Park, ahí no hay ningún problema. Pero tenemos el temor de que ahora que estén estas personas ahí, no tenemos nada en contra de ellos. Si ustedes quieren ayudar, qué bueno, pero busquen otro lugar donde no perjudiquen a la gente que no le hace daño a nadie. Ese es mi punto. Y creo que en Hillsborough hay mucha más seguridad que la que hay aquí en Cornelius. Yo no sé si ustedes hablaron con la gente, con la autoridad o con la policía en Hillsborough y aquí en Cornelius. Yo no creo que la seguridad aquí esté de acuerdo con esto que está pasando. Por favor, piensen en nuestros hijos, piensen en nuestra seguridad. Ustedes quieren arreglar a estas personas, qué bueno. Nosotros estamos ayudando y contribuyendo porque pagamos nuestros taxes. Entonces, usen esos taxes no para perjudicar a la gente que los está dando, sino más bien para la gente que lo necesita, pero no para que nos perjudiquen a nosotros.
Thank you. We are going to have to cut the Q&A short, or not short. We went about 20 minutes or 15 minutes over our meeting time. But I just want to reiterate, we have other opportunities to participate and transition to Jesse, who's going to share our next community engagement steps.
Hi, everyone. Thank you again for all of your time tonight. And I want to reiterate what Emily said. I realize we didn't get to all of the questions. We did record the meeting. We also, that includes recording all of the questions that are unanswered in the Q&A feature. So we will take note of those and answer them both on our website. And then we will also use them to inform the content for our next meeting to make sure that we answer those in the workshop. And I just want to address really quickly the concerns we continue to hear about safety and the point of these meetings. And I want to say that what we're going to be doing together through this process is the creation of that neighborhood plan and that safety plan included in there, how everybody, how we can address those safety concerns and how the county and the shelter operator will be working together with the community to address those concerns. So we'll take the content from the Q&A and post it on the website and use it to inform our content for the workshop meeting to create that neighborhood plan together. And I think the slide here says the next time is going to be July 11th from 6 to 7:30. That will be in person, and we'll have additional communication go out about that as a reminder and with the address as well. And here are the additional ways that you can stay engaged until that July 11th site. I also want to reiterate what Emily said about us being able to engage with you outside of these meetings. So please feel free to reach out to us to ask questions about that as well. So the Pod Village shelter is where that part of our website is where we're going to post the additional questions responses. And then you can also email us any questions you might have that you might not have gotten to tonight at the Homeless Services email right there. So that is our presentation for tonight. Thank you again for being here and caring so much about the community.
Thanks, everyone. I imagine we'll see many of you on July 11th. Have a good evening.